Shalom and welcome to the Israel Policy Pod. I'm Neri Zilber, a journalist based in Tel Aviv and a policy advisor to Israel Policy Forum. A lot to discuss this week with our regular check-in with Israel Policy Forum's very own Chief Policy Officer, Michael Koplow, and Shira Efron, the Diane and Guilford Glazer Foundation Senior Fellow and Director of Research here at IPF. We'll be discussing Donald Trump's plan, if that's what we can call it, to turn Gaza into the riviera of the Middle East, Bibi Netanyahu's trip last week to Washington in general, the state of the Gaza ceasefire deal, Saudi Arabia, and possible reform in the Palestinian Authority. It's always a cliche to say that there's a lot going on, but there always is, isn't there? A lot going on. It's a shame that the lives of millions of people and 76 Israeli hostages hang in the balance. Let's get to Michael and Shira. Hi, Michael. Hi, Shira. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks,
Hi, Neri.
Hi, Shira.
Hi, Michael.
Hi to you both. So last time you were on was exactly 3 weeks ago on the day of Donald J. Trump's inauguration. And also the ceasefire in Gaza had just begun. So I thought it'd be a good moment today to take stock of where things stand, especially given that just a few hours ago, and we're recording this Monday night Tel Aviv time, Hamas announced that it is delaying, quote unquote, until further notice, this Saturday's hostage release over what it alleged were Israeli violations of the ceasefire deal. There's still time, I hope, for mediators to resolve the differences, and our listeners may be a lot smarter than us when they hear this, but we'll address this real crisis, I dare say, in the ceasefire in just a minute. But the other big piece of news, of course, happened last week in Washington at the summit meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which made all kinds of news all over the world, believe me, primarily due to Donald Trump's inflammatory idea to, quote unquote, clean out Gaza, relocate nearly 2 million people, Palestinians, from Gaza, and create what he called a riviera of the Middle East. But by the way, there were also a lot of other important bits and bobs from last week that we'll also get into in just a moment. So, Michael, let's start with you. We all obviously saw the Trump-Netanyahu presser last week. Overall thoughts before we get into the brass tacks, especially about the big line with regard to the U.S. taking, what did he call it? A long-term ownership position in Gaza, sending in U.S. forces, rebuilding the place, et cetera, et cetera. What did you make of it all?
The first thing I made of it all is that it's not going to happen.
Okay.
And I think that today we're a little closer to resolving the question as to whether this was all, let's call it a helpful distraction that can maybe lead to something else, or whether not. Because we saw when he said what he said on Tuesday, and then immediately the next day, Mike Waltz and others walked it back. One of the things that Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, said was that this wasn't intended, there's do you take Trump literally or seriously, right? Waltz said this wasn't intended to be taken literally. This is just an opening position. And what's supposed to happen now is that Arab states are supposed to respond and come up with a plan of their own. My first thought, of course, is that Arab states have come up with a plan of their own. It's been out there for over a year, but that's neither here nor there. After he did that, Trump walked it back with a tweet saying, no, he was indeed serious. And in the tweet, or the Truth Social post, he said that the plan is serious, but people misread it because it's not going to involve U.S. boots on the ground. It's actually, I guess, the IDF that's going to go and clear out Gaza. And then when they're done, they're going to turn over ownership of it over to the United States. So all of a sudden, this isn't looking quite as good for Israel as the original version. And then over the weekend and today, in an interview with Fox, Trump made it clear that the U.S. is going to own Gaza. He's now repeated this a bunch of times. He has also clarified that Palestinians who leave will not be allowed to come back. So at this point, I think it's safe to surmise that he isn't viewing this as an opening negotiating position. I think he genuinely thinks this is a wonderful, brilliant once in a generation plan that he has come up with, and he wants to see it through, and he's going to threaten and rattle cages until people bend to his will. Now, I don't think the other states in the region are going to bend to his will. They've had a pretty united front so far. We have King Abdullah of Jordan here in the U.S. already, and he's supposed to be meeting with President Trump tomorrow. I can't imagine he's going to backtrack on this the same way that I can't really imagine that President Sisi of Egypt, whenever he comes to the U.S., is going to backtrack on it. And the Saudis and the Emiratis and all the rest have shown no daylight on this issue. So could it be that, yes, this is all meant to lead to some backtrack later when people come up with their own plan and he says, all right, this was all just an effort to try and get other people to take responsibility for Gaza? Sure, that's still possible. But I think that the more times he states the plan as is, and also contradicts his own advisors who say that the plan itself isn't meant to be taken seriously as is, the more you have to question whether there is some larger strategy behind this or whether he genuinely believes that this can be carried out. And so far, it seems to me that he genuinely believes that this can be carried out.
Right. With, like you said, the IDF doing the heavy lifting, right? That the IDF will have to actually conquer, reoccupy Gaza, which again, remains to be seen. We'll get to that in a second. But more to the point, that if this is really a leverage play, then he needs the Arab states to actually, I guess, put forward another plan, which, like you said, Michael, they have, and the U.S. and Israel have to listen and agree to that plan. But I agree with you, Michael. The Arab states, and especially Jordan and Egypt, can't agree to this idea for a million different reasons.
Right. And just the last thing I want to add on this is because this has been driving me crazy. Everybody's been describing this, or at least in President Trump circles and Israeli circles as well, as some sort of brand new out of the box idea that nobody's ever thought of before.
Well, some people have thought of it. Yeah.
Yes. Transferring Palestinians against their will from one area to a different area outside of mandatory Palestine ain't a new idea, and it ain't exactly out of the box. And if you think it's out of the box, then go talk to Bezalel Smotrich and his friends among the radical fringe of the settler movement. They have been talking about this constantly for years. So not new, not out of the box. We can we can call it whatever we like. That doesn't mean that this is some new formulation that nobody's ever thought of that is going to, change the game in a new way. It may change the game, but it's certainly not going to be in a new revolutionary way that nobody's ever thought of before.
Right, and I don't think it's going to be very constructive if Israel trades whatever happens with Gaza in the future for the demise of both Egypt and Jordanian stability. I'm not sure that's a great trade for Israeli national interests. Shira, same question to you. What did you make of last week's events, especially this idea of the riviera of the Middle East? And how do you think the Arab Straits, will respond moving forward? We obviously know how they've responded so far, but moving forward, what do you think they're going to do? How are they going to manage this Trumpian gambit?
Well, first of all, I think we have to say that, Neri, you live here too, and I think there has been in Israel some unrealistic expectation that Netanyahu is going to go to Washington and Trump is going to bend his arms. It's like this arm wrestling. He's going to bend his arm into a permanent ceasefire and accepting the PA. And there were promises in our
I never believed that.
The Israeli New York Times about normalization declaration and the White House. And of course, what we've seen is something completely different. We saw Ron Dermer, Netanyahu's, most trusted, probably only advisor, and Netanyahu. I don't have a better adjective. They were smug.
They were over the moon. They were beaming
over the moon, ecstatic. It's very clear that there is something, a complete alignment, not even an alignment, right, with basically Trump espousing an idea that, as you said, has not been a new idea, has been an idea, but an idea that was so taboo that even Netanyahu would never dare to mention it. So I think this is something about the Egypt and about the visit, in general, and the fact that Trump gave Bibi what he likes, which is sort of like the political victory at home, right? So that's on the visit. On the idea itself, people talk about the Trump plan. I would call something a plan when it has like clear steps and assumptions and budgets and timelines. This is not a plan. This is an idea, which I must admit, by discussing it so much, I'm debating whether we are normalizing it, because I think it's not a serious idea. I think it has a very, very, very low chances of feasibility. All of a sudden there's a discourse of like, oh, if Palestinians want to go out, why won't you let them? Of course, everyone is eligible for better lives. Well, I'll tell you what, for 16 months now, Palestinians have tried to get out of Gaza. We weren't so open about that, right? So all of a sudden it's for the welfare of Palestinians. And you see 72% of Israelis, which is essentially the vast majority of the Jewish population of this country, endorsing the plan, which has a strong ethical challenges. Let's say that. To put it mildly. Although here I want to say something that I think could be a little bit. I'm giving some grace to the people around Trump and maybe the president himself. That if you are motivated by quality of life. And you like just, which is normal, right? We all want nice lives. And you see the pictures from Gaza where basically the idea of, we all see the pictures from Gaza and you say, how can people live there? How can people live there? I will offer them something better. And if you don't have the attachment to the land and understanding of what this conflict is about, it makes perfect sense to you. What I think he's coming at it from this mentioning the real challenges of how can you live in Gaza now. We've been for many years saying that Gaza is unlivable, but arguably today it is unlivable if we could define what livable is. I know we say that this could be something that maybe urges the Arab countries to come up with a plan, which obviously they have a plan, but this plan does not have detailed steps of how do you handle rubble removal? How do you build? Where do you build? How do you clear all that up while you build? I mean, I think that this is, he put his finger on a real technical problem that is unprecedented. Okay. In the previous rounds of reconstruction of Gaza, and I've worked on these from a variety of perspectives, including consulting to the UN on different things that were allowed and not allowed to get into Gaza. This is a totally different scale at a very small territory, a real complex problem. So when we say that the Arabs and the rest of the international community that doesn't want this plan, and I agree with you, no one wants this plan, their counter proposals have to address this issue. I'll just say that it's also a lot of the assumptions, you mentioned Jordan. If Jordan is a country that, right, it's between, we call it between Iraq and a hard place. It has 1.3 million from Syria, refugees from Iraq. Obviously, have more than half the population is Palestinians. They have refugees from Sudan and from Libya. And I mean, Jordan literally cannot accept maybe 20 more refugees. But also, when we talk about Egypt, people say, well, Egyptians, you care so much about the welfare of the Palestinians. It is true. And that's why in their minds, they cannot be complicit with another Nakba, with another 1948, with another disaster. It's not about offering the Palestinians good lives or not. There are other issues with Egyptians conceding land and other things. But I think the whole assumption or the assumptions around why Palestinians want to live in their land, even though their land looks like it is, why Israelis want this land, why the Arab countries are not willing to help, or not willing to basically take the 2 million people of Gaza. There's real misunderstanding of the considerations all around now. And it's very concerning because the reports I'm hearing from Egyptian officials, but also Egyptian analysts, is that the anti-Israel sentiment has been at the highest, but now even more Same in Jordan. We are probably going to touch on the West Bank, what it does to destabilizing the West Bank. And I think the most urgent issue, obviously, is the fate of the ceasefire and hostage agreement, because this proposal does not encourage Hamas to continue implementing the agreement in good faith. So really, really, really dangerous. And I do hope that the Arab countries, which, by the way, are convening an emergency meeting February 27th, but also will come up with a serious plan that can compel to the president and his team. And I am hearing that there are people around him, and as we saw, others that try to backtrack this, that understand that this is not helpful, to say it mildly.
And let's not beat around the bush. Trump can keep insisting on this, and Bibi Netanyahu, like he did earlier today in the Knesset, can say flat out to the opposition, you wanted a day after plan for Gaza, a day after Hamas plan. This is it. Trump just gave you one, which is a remarkable statement coming from him. Once again, he could barely conceal his glee at the podium in the Knesset. So presumably this is Netanyahu's new day after plan, which would require many things, which we'll get into vis-a-vis the ongoing ceasefire for hostage release deal. But it would definitely require the Arab states to, I suppose, continue to say no. And then Trump will do what? Like he said, Michael said, he gave an interview to Fox News. What did Trump say? We give them billions of dollars. They'll do it, meaning right, Jordan and Egypt. So what is he going to do? Cut off aid to Jordan and Egypt and then, like I said, imperil those two countries, the stability in those two countries? How does that serve Israeli interests? How does that serve anybody's interests, even American interests?
It doesn't. And he might do it anyway. But I think the idea that the, $1.3 or $1.5 billion in military assistance that Egypt gets from the United States every year, yeah, it's important. But if Sisi thinks that allowing 1 million Palestinians from Gaza into Egypt is going to imperil Egyptian security or Egyptian stability or his own position, he's not going to do it. And $1.3 billion a year isn't going to be enough to convince him that he should roll the dice and do it. So I think that, in this case, in many instances, Trump is pretty good at seeing the leverage that he has, but I'm not sure that this is one where he has enough leverage to do the kind of thing that he's suggesting that he wants to do. And the shame of it is that there's a world in which this idea could have actually been the center of a plan that would have been workable. But that's not this. That would have meant spending months having conversations ahead of time with countries around the region and seeing if they are willing to take in small numbers of Palestinians and figuring out how you facilitate their exit from Gaza on a completely voluntary basis and not turning it into something that now this is going to be the new symbol of resistance, that you aren't willing to leave Gaza. Like this could have been the kernel of a decent idea that would have actually bettered the lives of Palestinians who wanted to take it and may have made things easier for an actual day after plan. But instead we have this, which now makes the reasonable version of this plan far harder than it would have been otherwise.
Correct. And it's also interesting, shall we say, that both Israeli and current American officials spent weeks, if not months, saying that the situation in Gaza wasn't that bad, right? It's not that bad of a crisis after 15, 16 months of war. And now they're all saying, well, of course, Gaza is uninhabitable and the Palestinians should just leave. So again, they're trying to grasp the stick from both ends, as they're wont to do. Moving ahead, we have to get into today's big news, which is the status of the Gaza ceasefire talks. In the real world and not in the East Room of the White House, there is a real and actually ongoing process that we have to grapple with. And as mentioned, we're now halfway through the initial 6-week first stage of the deal. Just to recap for our listeners, 16 Israeli hostages have so far been released in 5 different rounds over the past 3 weeks, in addition to 5 Thai nationals, foreign workers, that were seized on October 7th from southern Israel. 17 more Israeli hostages are set to be released in this first stage, as per the terms of the deal. But Hamas today announced that the 3 that were supposed to come out this coming Saturday has been delayed indefinitely. So basically, we all saw the very, very difficult scenes this last Saturday when Ohad Ben Ami, Eli Sharabi, and Or Levi barely walked out of Hamas captivity, emaciated. Everyone here in Israel immediately, and I'd argue correctly, referred back to scenes of the liberation of the concentration camps in World War II. And I guess I'm not going to belabor the point. I think all our listeners saw the images. We did warn people that the condition of the hostages would get worse as the weeks went by during this deal and the hostages were being released. And there has been an outcry in the days since by hostage families and a lot of other people in Israel for the government to get everyone out and to get everyone out quickly and fully, which the government, I think, may have different ideas about, but which Hamas definitely, I think, took into consideration and is now, I think, flexing its muscles. Shira, let's start with you this time. I guess the question on everyone's mind, as you know very well, until early today was, will there be a second stage to this deal, i.e. a permanent ceasefire in return for what are supposed to be 59 remaining hostages left at the end of this month, at the end of the first stage. But now the question is, will there even be the completion of the first stage, correct?
Correct. And I think we even discussed this on the podcast a few weeks ago, that if Hamas does not think there will be a stage 2, they will not complete stage 1, right? So while Israel was trying to actually just extend the first stage, so you don't have to get to the second stage, right? Because the second stage politically is much more challenging in Israel because it does require those discussions about the day after. I'm putting aside the Trump version of the day after, what we had until, in everyone's minds until last week, and also declaring an end of the war. So Hamas's formal announcement cites 4 violations, according to them, of the agreement, right? They say that there's a delay of letting civilians or Gazans return to the northern part of Gaza. We've seen a return of people, both by foot and in vehicles. So this is something that to me sounds like an alleged violation, but I don't know.
I think they're referring to the delay about a week and a half ago, right? That they're kind of name checking previous violation, yeah.
Right, but it's like, okay, now you're upset about a previous violation, but you did return.
Now you're upset about it, right?
Yeah. Right. So there's no violation at the moment, but that there is IDF firing in different areas of Gaza, and this has been the case. There have been, in areas supposed to be the buffer zone close to the Gaza bordering communities, the kibbutzim, there's been IDF firing there. But Israel says, Hamas, this is a violation of the agreement because people are not supposed to be there. They're talking about prevention of the entrance of tents, other temporary housing, solutions, fuel, and those D9s and heavy vehicles, rubble right, removal. For rubble removal. And that is true. The delay, I have to say that as far as I know, part of the delay is because the international community has not planned for temporary housing communities in advance. And so I won't say the number, but you need tens of thousands which were put in the agreement, and there are none. It's very hard to find a factory in the world that can produce these numbers very quickly and from materials that Israel would use that it cannot be turned into something else. So this is true, but I think also workable. And the second thing is delays in medical supplies. This is the fourth one, and supplies for rehabilitations of hospitals, which I'll remind also. I mean, I know it's the humanitarian appendix to the ceasefire agreement is classified, but it was leaked that there was a rehabilitation clause, rehabilitation of critical infrastructure, and assuming this also includes hospitals, we haven't seen that effort. Some of it is because, delays and technical issues. I think it would all be solvable, but it's all the other political stuff that's happening that they think that Israel will not going to get to second stage, as we said. And the Trump plan and the floating idea of the transfer. And it's not just Trump. There have been reports, and the Israeli defense minister, Israel Katz, has been public about it, that he instructed the IDF to start planning for implementation. There are discussions in the IDF about what do we do? How do we do? What's the first step? But what I see in this announcement, right? We are speaking now Monday evening, Israel time. Hamas says that the delay or the warning about the delay is just a message. It's a warning sign to Israel, and it's for putting pressure to abide by the agreement. And they said it on purpose. They're giving this notice 5 days ahead of the date of release to give the mediators a chance to pressure Israel and to keep the door open for returning the hostages alive. So we have a big, big test here for Qatar and Egypt as the mediators, and for the resolve of Steve Witkoff and his boss, President of the United States, who said he wants to see the hostages home. This is a real test. I personally really hope there will be more hostages coming home, especially, not just because of that, but those images from Saturday was another stark reminder, not that we needed one, that really we don't have time. We just don't have time.
No. The hostages in Gaza don't have time. I like that breakdown, Shira, because it got into the technicalities of the deal, which are important and critically important. And you also touched on the bigger picture context, which I want to get Michael's thoughts on. Number one, big picture, right? Trump's, quote unquote plan, which Netanyahu is now calling his day after plan, that, like you said, Shira, the IDF is at least making murmurs like it's planning to see how they can discuss implementation. So that's number one. Number two, Netanyahu has also made clear he wants to go back to fighting, that he still wants to destroy Hamas. He said that last week at the White House. He said that earlier today at the Knesset. So again, if Hamas wants a successful stage 2 and a permanent end to the war, which is its ultimate goal, not much incentive to kind of abide by Netanyahu's rules. But then number three, we have the overall context, which has been with us since October 8th, 2023, which is, how do you reconcile both Israeli war goals? Getting back all the hostages, which Netanyahu and Trump and everyone else says they want to do, on the one hand, and on the other hand, destroy Hamas or eliminate Hamas, whatever euphemism they use on a given day. And we never get a straight answer about that. And that is the rub. Coupled with point number 4, the negotiations over stage 2 were supposed to start a week ago. Last Monday, Netanyahu was in Washington. He delayed sending any negotiating team to Doha to begin those negotiations. The Israeli cabinet is supposed to meet tomorrow morning, and then maybe it'll deign to send a negotiating team to start negotiations over stage 2, which, as we all know, is supposed to end in 20 days? Less? So, Michael, how do you see the big picture context within which Hamas made this declaration today?
I think they did Netanyahu a favor because, as you point out, it's never been clear how you reconcile the two big war goals, getting hostages back and destroying Hamas. And we've seen that when Israel was in the mode of destroying Hamas, it wasn't getting hostages back. And now over the last 4 weeks, when it's been getting hostages back, it hasn't been destroying Hamas, and Hamas is in control. Now, I take Trump and Witkoff at their word, because all signs point to the fact that they indeed do want to see the deal continue, and that they do want to see the rest of the hostages come out. And if you're Bibi Netanyahu and you're stuck in between Trump and Witkoff on one hand and Bezalel Smotrich on the other, and Smotrich is demanding that you go back to fighting, and then Hamas basically comes and gives you this gift where they say, okay, you guys have violated the ceasefire. And by the way, they do that after the 3 hostages who were most recently released do indeed look like they've come out of Bergen-Belsen. So they give Netanyahu this gift where they're the ones who now say that they're out of the deal. He doesn't have to say it. And if they 5 days from now decide to release more hostages, then okay, Netanyahu has kept his pledge to stay in the deal, and he keeps Trump happy, and he can probably keep Smotrich at bay a little while longer. But if they don't, then he is able to go back to war. And why would Trump be angry with him? You know, he can legitimately say to Trump, I didn't do anything this time. Wasn't me. It was Hamas. So, what Hamas is doing, I'm not entirely sure, especially since it seems to me that when they have when they've messed around with the agreement, and we have seen it already a bunch of times during this first stage, they have ended up on the wrong side of it. So, for instance, when they didn't release Arbel Yehud when she was supposed to be released, they ended up having to add an additional release on a Thursday rather than on a Saturday. They haven't done well by not keeping to their side of things. So I'm not entirely sure what the strategy is now, why they think that somehow this time it's going to turn out better, that they're going to get some sort of new concession from Israel between now and Saturday. I don't see that happening. So I'm not really sure what to make of it from the Hamas side, unless they've read the signs that Netanyahu is completely uninterested in getting to stage 2. And those signs are pretty obvious to anybody who wants to see them. And maybe they've decided that, given everything that's going on, that blowing up the deal isn't necessarily a gamble, especially after their position has improved. Right? Israel withdrew from Netzarim 2 days ago. So
yep.
Doesn't mean they can't come back in, but it definitely means it's going to be tougher for them to relaunch the war with the same intensity when they've left their main position that was dividing northern Gaza from southern Gaza. And from you can confirm this, Neri, from what I've read, it seems that not only did they withdraw, but they also they took or destroyed or burned everything that was there so that it couldn't be used by Hamas. Understandably, but it also means that they go back in, it's going to be a much less convenient position to be holding. So maybe that's what Hamas is counting on, and they're ready to restart fighting and think that somehow it'll come out better or they can do more damage. But no matter how you look at it, whether they end up actually not releasing hostages on Saturday or whether they backtrack and they release another group, seems to me that Netanyahu is in a pretty good position no matter what, in terms of his own politics and the various promises he's made to different people.
I agree with you. This plays into Netanyahu's hands because, a lot of us had the suspicion that he was going to try to blame Hamas for the breakdown in talks by the end of the first stage and get Trump's acquiescence to go back to fighting, right? That was probably option number one for Netanyahu, unfortunately. But I will give Hamas a bit more credit. The current moment is, I think, a bit different than even a week ago. That this is a real kind of shot across the bow for Netanyahu, for the mediators, especially Egypt and Qatar, and the Trump administration. Essentially, maybe, this is Hamas's potential thinking, we're going to call Netanyahu's bluff. And, let's see you blow up the first stage halfway through and send the tanks back in, start bombing. That's going to go over very badly inside Israel. Obviously, massive majority support to get the hostages out. So even if you can't even get the first stage done, how will Trump feel about the resumption of fighting? Unclear. Nobody knows. Probably not even Trump. So again, hopefully the mediators get this done. But it's also an interesting point for Egypt and Qatar, right? I'm not sure how happy they are with the new U.S. administration and the Israelis at the moment. If the day after vision for Gaza on the back end of stage 1 is to force millions of Palestinians into Egypt and various other Arab states, I don't know, maybe there's less motivation by the Arab states to help the Americans and the Israelis. Shira, what do you think?
Yeah, I think very concerning. If we weren't already in the actual ceasefire agreement itself, right, in the midst of the implementation, would say this is the previous playbook, right? Israel says something, makes all these statements that make Hamas realize that Israel is not negotiating good faith for the end of the war, and therefore they're not playing ball. The problem is this is happening as we're on the go. I understand Hamas's gamble. There are IDF divisions that have been ordered. No one is going home this weekend, or no soldier. Apparently they received orders to stay put, that in the event that really the hostages do not come back home on Saturday. At least I think Israel is now, right, threatening that the IDF will go back into fighting in Gaza and unleash a level of fire that hasn't been seen, I don't know, ever. I think it's after wrecking.
ever?
Yeah, it's the statements are very dramatic. I think after ball wrecking through Gaza Strip, it's hard to imagine there's more fire than this. I agree that it's going to be very, very challenging with civilians all around, but it's not that IDF cannot go back in. It's going to be more complicated. It's a very, very, very dangerous moment. And what's sure, and if the fighting resumes, a lot of people are going to pay with their lives, and especially and we know that the hostages also are going to be among them. So I am very concerned and hope it will be solvable. And honestly, I think we're talking about Qatar and Egypt, but from Israel's perspective, what Trump does now, there's a real test for him. I will say the public opinion here. The Israeli public, after seeing those images, there is, I don't know if you agree with me, Neri, but it seems that, first of all, with the first hostages that came back, right, we're happy about everyone, but it's those images have clarified that they have no time, that we can't spend any more time. So I assume there's going to be public pressure also on Israel. It was interesting, but the immediate response by Netanyahu was like, oh, Hamas is going to pay for starving them or for how they look. I mean, the response should be like, oh my God, look how they look. We have to get them out of there. Hamas can pay later. So that's one thing. The second thing is that, of course, very cowardice responses by the prime ministers. We didn't know that they were in this condition. Now, of course, we knew. Everyone knew. There was not just intelligence. There were also reports from other hostages that came back. And we knew from a good few months ago, before Yahya Sinwar was killed, that he gave an order to basically starve the hostages. We knew some of them are shackled, that they can't move, that they're held in small places where they can't. I'm sorry, I'm being graphic about it. We knew that Hirsch Goldberg, Poland, who's a very tall guy, came back in a very extreme, his body was extremely underweight, and so was other hostages. So, the response of, I have no expectations from Hamas, but the response of the Israeli leadership to what is happening is beyond frustrating.
It's also comes after 16 months of not incorrect statements from the Israeli government saying Hamas are Nazis, they don't act like human beings. Well, either they believe that from the beginning, in which case nobody should be surprised that they're starving and torturing hostages, particularly male hostages, or that was all just a cynical ploy, and now their eyes are open. Only one of those two things can be true, and those are the only two possibilities. So, and neither of them makes the Israeli government look very good at all. So. I agree with Shira. The messaging here from the Israeli government, it's not just ridiculous, it's offensive.
It is offensive. Oftentimes it's also kind of disconnected from reality, like we've touched on in this episode and previous episodes, just the inherent contradictions with the policy and also the statements. It's interesting to me whether the ceasefire breaks down and fighting resumes this week or maybe in a couple weeks at the end of stage one. This may be kind of a rerun or Back to the Future moment where I think at least initially the fighting will look a lot more like previous Gaza rounds than post October 7th. That I think initially it'll be more kind of air power and other, shall we say, kinetic action to try to get Hamas to bend and to cave, to send a message, basically, coercion, and not a full-scale invasion and reoccupation kind of immediately. And in that case, I think it'll be very interesting to see how Hamas reacts inside the Strip. Coupled with, you're going to be fighting a war under the aegis and the umbrella of President Trump. So does that give Israel more tools, more leeway? Possibly, compared to fighting a war under a Democratic president. So a thought experiment, and I'll leave it there, and then hopefully I'm wrong, or hopefully that doesn't come to pass, and the ceasefire holds, the mediators get it resolved, and more hostages come out. Okay, we'll be right back after this brief message.
The hostage ceasefire deal in Gaza has thus far enabled 21 hostages to return home to their families, but the lives of dozens more continue to hang in the balance. With the future of the ceasefire increasingly uncertain following President Trump's proposal to permanently expel Gaza's residents and take over the Strip, Israel Policy Forum experts continue to provide timely, trustworthy analysis. On Monday, Dr. Shira Efron, the Diane and Guilford Glazer Foundation Senior Fellow at Israel Policy Forum, penned an op-ed in the New York Times explaining how Trump's plan for Gaza raises the stakes surrounding the question of Gaza's future and provides Prime Minister Netanyahu with a political lifeline. This past Friday, The Forward published an op-ed by me, Alex Lederman, Israel Policy Forum's Senior Policy and Communications Associate, about how the hostages stand to be impacted by the new position of the administration. Links to both of these resources can be found in the show notes of this podcast. If you rely on Israel Policy Forum for credible, nuanced analysis, please make a gift today so that Israel Policy Forum's work can continue to have an impact. Donate now at ipf.li/supportthepod or at the Support the Show link in the show notes.
Moving forward, the other bit of big news that kind of got lost in the shuffle over the past week, aside from Gaza, the quote-unquote plan, aside from potentially destabilizing Jordan and Egypt, the other potential likely future big loser was maybe Saudi Arabia. And we always hear this carrot being floated about a normalization deal being near. There was an idea before Netanyahu got to Washington that, maybe this is going to be the big reveal. Once again, people were proven wrong. But it does seem, just based on his public comments, that Netanyahu isn't prioritizing Saudi normalization as much as maybe we prioritize Saudi normalization for Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi has said clearly he's not willing to end the war. He's not willing to hear about any role for the Palestinian Authority in post-war Gaza. And he's not even willing to entertain the idea of a pathway towards a Palestinian state. All preconditions, as we understand it, for the Saudis to enter into a normalization deal with Israel. And Bibi basically said, last Friday to Channel 14, his favorite quote-unquote media outlet, this kind of far-right mouthpiece for him here. I'm paraphrasing. He told them, don't worry, eventually the Saudis will cave, just like the Emiratis caved on the issue of Palestinian statehood back in, 2020, during the Abraham Accords. So don't worry, the Saudis will kind of come to us and we won't have to come to the Saudis. Shira, you follow this issue closer than most. Will the Saudis cave?
Hard to believe they will cave. We've spoken about it beforehand, right? We've been hearing for for 16 months, in fact, that Saudi and Israel are very close to signing a normalization agreement. And while I think the Saudis were close to it or to agreeing to it because of the goodies that they won from the United States, right? The Israeli part of it is the sideshow to the big not concessions. I mean, the goodies that they want from the United States. And we've spoken about defense treaty and the type of nuclear program without restrictions, essentially on uranium enrichment. For that, you need a majority of 67 in the Senate. And and the assumption is that would not go without normalization with Israel. And this is how this whole thing was born. After October 7th, the images from Gaza have made the Palestinian issue that was less on the issue of the young generation in Saudi Arabia than the older generation, made it, to the top of the agenda. And they've hardened their positions. We've seen it gradually harden. And the more that you heard Israeli and Americans speak about, no, the Saudis essentially are going to throw the Palestinians under the bus, we saw the Saudis make harsher statements. And we could have a whole podcast on that, but I do think there are many assumptions on the Saudis about what they want, about what they need. MBS, right, the crown prince, the ruler, is actually a leader that conducts a lot of surveys. His population cares about it. It doesn't really matter what he has in his heart or doesn't have for the Palestinians. It's something that he needs for his people. He needs it for passing his reform agenda and competition inside the royal court. He needs it for the regional competition with Iran and with Turkey and with Qatar. There's this assumption that the Saudis didn't like Biden, which I tend to agree, but this does not mean that they are huge fans of Donald Trump. I've heard from a Saudi analyst that they were frustrated with Trump administration not obviously coming to their defense when there was an attack on the Saudi Aramco facilities in Trump's first term, but also that they're frustrated that they're viewed as a wallet for businesses. This is not how they want to be viewed. Maybe has been the traditional position. And to expect that Saudi will make a fancy U-turn and go back to October 6th positions, given all that's going on, I thought it was unrealistic all this time. And what we've been hearing recently just shows us that. I'll just give you an anecdote. I mean, I can be off the record. This is a podcast, but I will say that a senior Saudi
amongst friends.
No, but I'm saying my understanding, okay? My understanding is that the wordsmithing that we have envisioned, right? And obviously that Netanyahu and his coalition can't even mumble, right? Say something about Palestinian political horizon. They can't even do that. The Saudis can't even use those terms in their papers. Now, maybe it's their starting position, but they can't use process. They can't use political horizon. It's very clear. It's a state or a credible pathway to a state, a two-state solution. Obviously, the statements on Palestinian state in Gaza, where they have lots of territory, was not taken as a joke in Riyadh and not anywhere else in the region. I don't see this coming. And I have to tell you that unless something really big happens, it would be very hard to recover this file in the foreseeable future. But I think the conversation is a bit wrong. We're constantly, at least in Israel where I sit, right, the conversation is also like, what can we extract from the Saudis for minimal concessions on the Israeli side, right? What can we get from that? We can get from this if we mumble this word and not this word, and you say this and another country recognizes the Palestinians. And the conversation, I think, for anyone pragmatic who wants to have a better future in this region should be, how do we use the real leverage that Saudi Arabia can have, not as a wallet, but as the most important player and country in the Arab and Muslim world? How can we use Saudi to help make advancements for a constructive process on the Israeli and Palestinian side? And this is really the question that we should all be asking.
We should definitely be asking that question. I don't think Netanyahu these days is listening. I think Saudi normalization, just based on his public comments, how he kind of almost treats the issue, I think it's maybe number 4 or 5 on his list of priorities after not ending the war, destroying Hamas, keeping his coalition together, Iran, potentially enacting Trump's Gaza Riviera plan, and so on and so forth. The Saudi normalization carrot has been out there for over a year, but the Biden administration tried it last year. Netanyahu didn't bite, to kind of stretch the carrot analogy to its breaking point. I don't know. I don't see him kind of preparing the public and especially his right-wing base for that kind of turnaround if the Saudis hold the line, which I think they likely will. Michael, what do you make of the Saudi normalization issue and Netanyahu's approach to it these days?
I think that if anybody wants to get Israel-Saudi normalization, then everything should be geared toward making it easier for them, not harder for them. And all that we've seen recently is things that will make it harder for them. So whether it is the Trump Gaza plan, which then forced MBS to issue a statement in his own name, not in the name of some random other official, changing the language to now there won't be any recognition of Israel until there is an actual Palestinian state with a capital in East Jerusalem. A position, by the way, that I don't think they actually will hold to when all is said and done, but it's now harder to walk that back. And, to Shira's point, every time he or somebody else kind of blithely mentions that the Saudis are just going to pay for everything, they're going to fund all of it, knowing that they have their own serious domestic needs, which with Vision 2030, and they don't like to be treated just like a pocketbook. And every time Netanyahu talks about how they're going to eventually cave and they're going to come around to him, and just like the Emiratis did, aside from the fact that you're embarrassing the Saudis, they also have their own competition with the Emiratis. So saying that they're gonna settle just like the Emiratis did. That's not going to make them more amenable to something like that. It's just going to make it even tougher. So it doesn't seem to me like anything that's gone on over the last month is bringing this closer, no matter how many times Netanyahu talks about the circle of peace and widening that circle. And every time Trump insists that the Saudis don't actually mean what they say and he's going to get to a normalization deal, I think he's just, all these things have made it far more difficult. And then when you look at Netanyahu, I agree with you, Neri, it doesn't seem like he really prioritizes this issue. And we see that in all sorts of ways. And it also makes me a bit wary of the arguments, and we see these all the time, that, Netanyahu won't do X or Netanyahu won't do Y because he knows that if he does it, it's going to ruin the prospect for Saudi normalization. So, we have this thing out there that by the way, may end up being even more impactful than whatever Trump said about Gaza last week, which is Trump's almost offhand comment that within 4 weeks, he's maybe going to be making an announcement about Israeli sovereignty in the West Bank.
Mm-hmm.
And the notion that is something that simply cannot happen at the moment, because if it does, then that will ruin the prospect of Saudi normalization. It doesn't seem to me that is where Netanyahu's head is at all. I think that given the prospect of Trump dangling in front of him an American green light and immediate recognition of annexation of the Jordan Valley and Ma'ale Adumim, or immediate American recognition of the application of sovereignty to all settlements, seeing that in front of him and saying, okay, great, if I have that, then I basically keep Smotrich in here for another 2 years, versus, oh no, I'm going to reject that because if I take it, then Saudi normalization isn't going to happen in the next few years. I think he's running toward door number one without even looking back. So the signs from him don't seem to indicate that this is a priority or that he has any sort of realistic view as to what he would have to do to make it a priority. And while I do believe it's a priority for Trump, I just don't think that he's able to get out of his own way. He throws all these statements and ideas out there, and he's so used to the blustering and browbeating and public shaming working for him here in the United States, where it absolutely has, for him politically, but that doesn't necessarily translate to working when you want to get the Saudis or anybody else in the region to agree to this thing that's very difficult for them politically, and it's going to be pretty complex. So it doesn't seem to me as if Israel-Saudi normalization is closer now than it was when Biden was president.
And it's a good point. This was almost a throwaway line during that Netanyahu-Trump press conference, but dramatic nonetheless. And once again, it raises the question, was this a leverage play by Trump to throw it out there? Oh, we may recognize Israeli annexation in the West Bank to get the Arabs to move, or are they seriously just considering letting the Netanyahu government do it?
It could have been a leverage play, but I suspect, given that he had not said anything about it before the meeting with Netanyahu, not in comments to reporters and not in that quick press gaggle they did before the actual meeting. My guess is that it's something that Netanyahu and Dermer brought up during that meeting, told him that they need it in order to keep the coalition together. And so he decided to say it out loud when he was asked about it at the press conference after. That's complete speculation on my part, but that's my guess.
Not bad speculation. I was just going to say, Shira, on Michael's point, real quick, not bad speculation because 4 weeks gets him through potentially stage one of the Gaza ceasefire, maybe a bit after.
Right.
Again, maybe
and the budget
next month. Right. So this kind of
that
carrot.
The 4 weeks that Trump threw out it was too convenient. It seemed like somebody had put that in his head, an hour before.
Right. Sorry, Shira, I cut you off.
No, it's okay. I think we need to remember that there are secretive and also some not so secretive ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia, right? This is not to say that there isn't regional integration happening on other fronts. There could be Israeli athletes in sports competitions in Saudi Arabia. We know of Israeli companies that are operating in Saudi Arabia, either through intermediaries or not. And obviously there's a whole defense Channel, both being part of the U.S. Central Command, and a lot of other, classified connections that are happening. And one of so there are things that are happening, and it does not mean that we will not see advancement of Saudi Arabia's interests and where Israeli interests are aligned also, and on the other stuff, which is good news, right? But making the step toward coming out of the closet, if you will, and having normalized relations, this to me seems far. And this is also when we go back to the assumptions, I think, and I've said it myself, but I think I've learned to now that Saudi Arabia is not the UAE. The process is not necessarily reminiscent of the ties, the clandestine ties that Israel had with the UAE. And then, you have clandestine ties, and then the linear process that they turn into public ties. No, actually having the secretive ties, it's what allows you to go on like this forever if you can obtain from this relationship most of what you need without going public, going to the next step. And so I think this is important, but at least I can say, and I think we've seen it with other countries as well, even though ties between Israel and, obviously the Palestinians, but also Jordanians and Egyptians and other countries have been affected badly by this war. We haven't seen a disconnect, and at least in terms of the really critical stuff and the defense stuff, we see continued coordination across the board.
We do, but it's an important point. This is all coming in the midst of a brutal and highly televised war that a lot of people across the Middle East feel very strongly about. And you add to that this new U.S.-Israeli idea, plan, vision, call it what you will, to depopulate Gaza. It's only going to make things worse. Final question to you both. Earlier today, there was also a bit of big news, we can say, out of the Palestinian Authority. President Mahmoud Abbas announced that he was reforming the payments that had been given to families and relatives of, Palestinians who had committed terrorist attacks on Israelis, so-called pay-to-slay program. We're still trying to figure out all the various details and moving parts, but from what you both know, how significant is this move, which both Israel and the U.S. have been calling for the PA to make for a number of years? So it kind of came out of the blue, but during a very interesting and delicate time. Michael, what did you think of this bit of news today?
Hard to judge, since at the moment it's just a statement from the Palestinians, and obviously there's been reporting on it. But if we take it at face value, then it seems as if they actually have ended the prisoner and martyr payment system. And in the declaration, they say that the families and prisoners who were eligible under that former system can now apply to the regular needs-based social welfare system, and that they're going to be dealt with in the regular system like everybody else. So if that actually happens, then this will be a huge deal, and it's something that the Biden administration was working on. Without naming names, if you talk to former Biden administration officials, they will tell you that this deal has been on the table now for a long time, as is, and that Abu Mazen just wasn't willing to do it. And I think that much like the hostage and ceasefire deal, this is another issue where the Biden team did the hard work and they had something there, but they just didn't have the leverage that they needed over the Palestinians to get them to do it. And obviously the Palestinians, whether they're scared of Trump or whether they want to get off on a good foot with him, in contrast to the way things unfolded last time he was president, for whatever reason, it seems like they're now willing to implement it. And that is definitely a good thing. This was a terrible system. And the Palestinians have been sanctioned for it by the United States and by Israel, rightly so. And if it really comes to an end, it's an unqualified good thing no matter what. But it will also bring with it, hopefully, real changes in both Israeli and U.S. policy. And from the U.S. side of things, the Taylor Force Act from 2018, which is what was passed to address this issue, it's not going to just go away because it requires certification by the Secretary of State that the Palestinians are in compliance, and that has to be done every 6 months. So this isn't the sort of thing, if they really want to make U.S. policy change, that they can just say, okay, we change things, and then, quietly in 6 months or 12 months or 2 years, go back to what they were doing before, because the law stays on the books, and the certification is going to happen continuously. So I really hope that this is real. And if it is, both the US and Israel will have to certify it and say that it is. And, that's how we will truly know.
But then that may not necessarily mean that the Palestinian Authority will resume getting direct U.S. government funding.
Correct. Right. So from the U.S. side, what Taylor Force did was say that the U.S. couldn't spend any money that directly benefits the Palestinian Authority. Taylor Force didn't actually even address direct payments to the Palestinian Authority. Those ended in 2014. And so even if this satisfies Taylor Force, it means the U.S. can go back to spending money in the West Bank, not by giving it to the PA, but on things that will directly benefit the PA. Of course, this comes amid an almost universal foreign aid freeze on the part of the Trump administration. So even if the Palestinians are in compliance, I'm not sure that this administration is going to rush into spending money in the West Bank that directly benefits the PA. But even if they've gotten rid of this problem, there are still other laws that prohibit the U.S. from funding the PA directly until the PA, for instance, withdraws its membership from certain UN organizations. So long as the PA is still pursuing cases against Israel in international courts like the ICJ or the ICC, then the U.S. by law is prohibited from direct budgetary payments to the PA. So this doesn't impact any of that. But if it holds up, then there's a world in which the next Democratic president, or perhaps even Republican president who isn't Donald Trump, can restore economic support to the West Bank in ways that might directly benefit the Palestinian Authority.
And restore economic support all over the world, presumably. Shira, what did you make of this bit of news today?
I was actually, I don't say excited, but I was a little bit excited. I think, obviously, the system itself had to be reformed for many, many years. We've been saying this. This is something that can unlock so much. There's the financial aspect of it, that if it goes well and Israel and the U.S. Respond to it in favorable ways. But also, I think it's just a statement. It's a statement about the Palestinian Authority taking leadership. I don't want even to say sort of like reclaiming the national Palestinian project, but there is, at a time when Hamas, does these horrible war crimes, right? Allegedly to bring home hostages, the PA is taking a bold step, which was in the planning for a long, long time, and for a variety of reasons didn't happen. So I do think they need to be applauded. I will tell you that some people in the IDF that are working on this file, someone even told me historical day, that big. The timing, historical, I think, day for them is historical day. We'll see again, but think it's courageous to do this, right? As Hamas prides Palestinians through the streets of Ramallah, right? For the PA to say, we're changing the system. Of course, Hamas, as expected, right? Criticized the PA for doing this. And it's not that the Palestinian Authority is very strong and can afford themselves to take such a courageous step. It's really, we should applaud that. And I do hope, because we know that they did a successful pilot already, and we know this has been in the making. And I think it's very smart on their part. Of course, I would have loved them to do it 3 years ago when this was in serious conversation, when they were in serious conversations with the Biden folks about it. But it's a smart move, right? To start really good with the Trump administration, say, look, we're giving you something. We're doing something for you. You can claim this. And this, as we are talking about, right, Neri, in the context of the Saudi question, you were saying that Israel, of course, keeps saying no Palestinian Authority, no Palestinian Authority. But in fact, we know it's a complete lie, right? In the West Bank, of course, but also in Gaza, not just during the war, the coordination with specific people in Ramallah about a variety of things, but also in the implementation of the deal and the Rafah operation of the crossings. It's with the Palestinian Authority. It's
not unicorns brought from the moon to manage the Rafah crossing.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if you combine that, Israel said, there is this concession, or not concession, but basically, if we were to say Anyway, if the crisis now with Hamas is resolved and Israel was smarter about it or thought more about their foreign policy and defense policy and not about the politics of it, right? You could say, hey, we are actually giving the world what they want. Israel can reap diplomatic benefits from allowing the Palestinian security forces to be there. And then with the PA changing their reforming, stopping to pay prisoners, Israel can claim this is a victory, right? That they had led to this, changing this appalling behavior of the PA and move us to a much better future. So I do hope that it's a great policy. It's a great policy move on the PA, not necessarily politically palatable for them, a big frog to swallow. And I do hope that the powers in Jerusalem and in Washington respond in a positive way.
We can only hope, but like you said, this is a rare yet positive statement of intent by the Palestinian Authority, showing that it is willing to reform itself on some level, which is what many people have been calling for years, but especially in the context of the Gaza war and a potential day after. So remains to be seen how it's swallowed and understood and likely, spun, especially in Jerusalem. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this week. We didn't get a chance to talk about the ongoing and pretty massive IDF operation in the West Bank. We didn't get a chance to talk about Iran. That was the other bit of news coming out of last week's White House summit. We didn't get a chance to talk about Lebanon and the ceasefire, which is supposed to conclude on some level next week, perhaps. So a lot more to talk about in future with you both. But for now, Michael, Shira, thank you so much. And I'll talk to you soon. And I'll see you both very soon.
Yes, looking forward to spending a few days with you guys next week.
Yes, see you soon, and let's hope for good news on the hostage ceasefire agreement.
Let's hope, and let's hope we have 3 more Israelis coming home in a few days. Take care, both. Bye. Okay, thanks again to Michael Koplow and Shira Efron, as always, for their generous time and insights. Also, a special thanks to our producer, Jacob Gilman, and to all of you who support Israel Policy Forum's work. Do consider making a donation to Israel Policy Forum to keep being a credible source of analysis and ideas on issues such as these that we all care deeply about, including this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for listening.